The air in Northwood City had turned crisp by late September, carrying the scent of damp earth and approaching autumn. Rain pattered against the large classroom windows, smudging the gray sky and creating the perfect atmosphere for napping. A good half of the students in the back rows had already succumbed. Caleb, usually the first to be slumped over his desk, was uncharacteristically alert, his face propped on one hand. His attention was entirely on the phone hidden in his lap, a small smile playing on his lips as he texted Jenna from the arts program. They had been talking for a while, a comfortable familiarity growing between them. When she mentioned bringing him a coffee after the next period, his lingering sleepiness evaporated completely. He felt a phantom warmth spread through his chest. Just as he finished typing a reply, the unnerving sensation of being watched crept over him. He instinctively glanced up, his eyes locking with the physics teacher at the front of the room. Mr. Harrison was accustomed to the first period drowsiness that plagued his students, but he was genuinely surprised to see Caleb not only awake but looking rather cheerful. In over a year of teaching him, this was a first. Mr. Harrison's lips curved into a grin. He announced that since Caleb was so engaged, he would be the one to answer the current problem. Caleb rose slowly, his eyes scanning the large projection screen filled with multiple-choice questions. He offered a hopeful guess. See? A wave of suppressed snickers rippled through the room. Leo, sitting beside him, buried his face in his arms to muffle his laughter. He informed Caleb in a choked whisper that the teacher had asked for the methodology, not just a letter. Mr. Harrison just sighed and gestured for him to sit, reminding the class that the bell would ring in 10 minutes. It was then that a commotion started outside the rear classroom door. Muffled voices debated whether to knock during a physics class. One voice argued that their teacher, Old Harrison, had a soft spot for his prize student and wouldn't mind. Another voice, drier and more detached, questioned the point of entering at all when they could just as easily rest on the floor outside. The first voice countered that his phone and water were inside, but was quickly reminded that due to the new seating chart, the back row was now occupied by Caleb. There was a brief, telling silence, followed by a dismissive scoff that their leader, Asher, wasn't afraid of him. Outside the door, a different voice, laced with amusement, told the others to stop acting like elementary schoolers. The bell finally shrieked, signaling the end of class, and the room erupted into chatter. Just as quickly, the front door was kicked open with a loud bang. Chris stood there, grinning at Mr. Harrison's twitching mouth as he offered a booming morning. Mr. Ash. The teacher's gaze swept over the group of boys, noting the sheen of sweat on their foreheads. He didn't need to ask where they had been. He recalled the initial shock among the faculty when Asher first started skipping class, the fear that their star student was finally going off the rails. They soon realized he was merely taking occasional breaks, yet he never failed to secure the top rank in the grade. The teachers had grown accustomed to his ways, leaving him be as long as his grades remained immaculate. Chris, feeling no guilt, confirmed they'd been on the basketball court, claiming a little morning activity was necessary to wake up the brain. His swagger earned a few scattered laughs from the class. He was about to add another witty remark when a gentle nudge to his calf from behind served as a silent command to move. Mr. Harrison addressed the tallest of the group. He commended Asher on his perfect score on the recent physics exam, acknowledging the paper's difficulty and praising his diligent effort. Hearing this, Chris shot a strange look back at Asher. The idea of him laboring over physics was laughable to anyone who knew him. He was a natural, pure talent. The other boys in their group struggled to contain their smirks. The subject of the praise, however, remained impassive, his long lashes lowering slightly as he thanked the teacher, playing the part of a dedicated student flawlessly. The energy of recent physical exertion radiated from the teenagers. Though only a sophomore, Asher already possessed a broad-shouldered frame. As he reached for a textbook, the muscles in his arm contracted into sharp, defined lines. Beside Caleb, Leo watched, his heart fluttering. He whispered about how impossibly handsome their class president was, declaring that his face was now permanently etched in his heart. Caleb responded with a humorless smile, questioning why, if Asher was already in his heart, Leo didn't just go for it. Leo sighed dramatically, explaining that with so many admirers, dating him would be a constant battle against jealousy and exhaustion. He then amended his statement, musing that if Asher were to smile at him just once, the hardship might be worthwhile. Ignoring him, Caleb pushed his chair back and left the classroom. The hallway was a bustling river of students. He was idly staring at a hanging plant on the floor above when he heard his name. He turned, his expression brightening instantly. Jenna stood there, holding 2 iced coffees, a warm smile on her face. Her chestnut-colored hair was tied up in a messy bun, and a swipe of red lipstick highlighted her lips. Beneath her oversized school blazer, the strap of a white tank top was visible. Caleb had always been drawn to girls with a bold, vibrant beauty, a consistent taste Leo often teased him about. He softened his voice, a smile touching his own lips as he asked why she had brought 2 drinks. She explained that one was for him and the other was for his class president. Just like that, Caleb's smile vanished. He repeated the name, his voice flat. Asher? Jenna, oblivious to his shift in mood, continued cheerfully. The one with less sugar was his, and the standard one was for Asher, who apparently didn't like things too sweet. She held the drinks out, leaving Caleb with no choice but to take them. She asked him to let her know when Asher accepted it and to thank him for her. Caleb re-entered the classroom, the 2 cold cups clutched in his hand. His gaze swept over the room before reluctantly settling on a desk near the window, for rows from the back. The boy sitting there was tall even when seated, his long legs stretched out before him. He had the kind of effortlessly handsome face that Leo had just been waxing poetic about. Objectively, Caleb had to admit he was good-looking. It was just a shame his face was so punchable. Expressionless, Caleb walked over and placed the coffee on Asher's desk, stating that it was from Jenna. A ripple of interest spread through the nearby students, their conversations quieting as they turned to watch. Asher looked up, his monolid eyes framed by thick, dark lashes giving him a perpetually detached and aloof air. His long fingers spun the plastic cup once on the desk. He said it wasn't for him. Caleb forced himself to be patient, explaining that it was the low-sugar one and not very sweet. Before Asher could respond, he added that if he wasn't going to drink it, he could throw it away himself. With that, he turned and walked away. Chris, who sat next to Asher, pulled out an earbud. The tension between Caleb and Asher was a well-known, if unspoken, fact in their class. Having missed the part about Jenna, Chris was simply stunned by the sight. He wondered aloud if the world was ending, that he had just witnessed Caleb bringing Asher a drink. He asked Asher if he thought the coffee was poisoned. A low chuckle escaped Asher. Chris looked at him, bewildered, asking what was so funny. Asher shook his head, a ghost of a smile on his lips as he said it wasn't poisoned. He pulled out the physics problems he'd ignored in class, deciding to look them over. He just found Caleb's whole demeanor, that aggressive, confrontational way of delivering a peace offering, thoroughly amusing. When Caleb returned to his seat, Leo couldn't contain his curiosity and asked where the coffee came from. Caleb's tongue pushed against the inside of his cheek as he muttered that it was from Jenna. For him, Leo was momentarily speechless. He and Caleb had been friends for years. Caleb was a beta from a wealthy, permissive family. His grades were abysmal, but his good looks had always ensured a smooth, carefree life. Since starting high school, however, some strange curse had fallen upon him. Nearly every girl he took an interest in ended up liking Asher. This recurring pattern had turned Asher into Caleb's nemesis. Leo often thought that if it were anyone else, Caleb, with his volatile temper, would have resorted to violence long ago. Caleb's phone vibrated. It was Jenna, asking if Asher had taken the coffee. Grinding his teeth, Caleb typed back a terse yes. He then turned to Leo, a strange question forming on his lips about what made Asher so special compared to him. Unlike Caleb, Leo was an omega. He understood the primal appeal of an alpha like Asher far better than Caleb ever could. Though Caleb was undeniably attractive, he was, by all societal standards, a spoiled, directionless rich kid. Leo couldn't say that, of course. The lack of understanding about alpha-omega-beta dynamics in Caleb's beta brain would likely earn him a punch. Instead, Leo offered a comforting lie, cooing that Caleb was obviously better. He praised Caleb for being more approachable, whereas an alpha like Asher was an unattainable ideal, best admired from a distance. Caleb's attention was momentarily diverted by the strange term of endearment, and he asked when male omegas had started calling each other girlfriend. Seeing his chance, Leo tried to steer the conversation further away, launching into a description of omega slang. But Caleb suddenly narrowed his eyes, his friendly demeanor gone. He repeated Leo's word back to him with chilling intensity. Approachable? Just as quickly, the fire went out of him. He slumped in his chair, listlessly poking the straw of the coffee Jenna had given him. He mumbled to himself, wondering why, if he was so approachable, she couldn't just like him. For a fleeting second, Leo found his dejection almost cute. It lasted only a second. At the Monday morning assembly, the entire student body gathered in the gymnasium. Caleb arrived late, sauntering toward the sophomore section. As he walked, he drew appreciative glances from several girls. Even his detractors had to admit their class was stacked with handsome boys, though some still whispered that he was just a troublemaker with bad grades. His skin was pale, his frame tall and lean. A faint redness rimmed his eyes, and his dark hair was a mess, clear evidence of oversleeping. The dean's voice boomed over the microphone from the stage, urging the stragglers to hurry to their class lines. Caleb ignored the command, moving at his own leisurely pace to the back of his class row. Leo, who stood in front of him, had only arrived a few minutes earlier himself. He greeted Caleb through a mouthful of yogurt, asking why he wasn't in uniform. Caleb just shrugged, saying he forgot. Just then, 2 female students from the disciplinary committee made their way toward their class. Leo assumed Caleb was about to be written up, not that either of them particularly cared. But to his surprise, Caleb flashed the girls a charming smile, asking if they could possibly let it slide this one time. The girl with the clipboard, who had been about to mark his name, hesitated. Her friend nudged her, but she seemed torn, caught between her duty and Caleb's disarming plea. It was this scene that Asher saw when he turned around. Caleb was saying something that made the disciplinary monitor blush to the tips of her ears. He possessed a roguish, youthful charm, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and pale lips that curved into a lazy, alluring smile that was equal parts affectionate and fickle. Chris had pointed out to Asher that the monitors were lingering too long, potentially drawing the dean's attention. As class president, it was his job to handle such things. Chris had meant it as a joke, knowing Asher rarely involved himself in class affairs. He was surprised when Asher actually walked to the back of the line. His arrival broke the stalemate. He asked if it was permissible to go to the classroom to get a uniform now. Seeing him, the two girls exchanged a glance, a hint of shyness in their eyes. One of them stammered that since the assembly hadn't officially started, it was allowed. Asher looked at Caleb. He told him to go to the classroom and wear Chris's spare jacket, which was hanging on his chair. Caleb met his gaze, and for some inexplicable reason, a wire snapped inside him. The calm, effortless way Asher handled everything suddenly felt like a personal affront. A rebellious energy radiated from him as he smirked, a challenge in his eyes. He claimed he'd sprained his ankle, and a trip to the classroom and back might aggravate the injury. His eyes stayed locked on Asher's as he delivered the final, audacious blow. He suggested that Asher, as class president, should just take off his own uniform jacket and give it to him. A true act of helping a classmate in need, he added. Even though their mutual dislike was common knowledge, Caleb rarely confronted Asher so directly. The standoff between the two most prominent figures in their grade drew stares not just from their own class, but from others nearby. Asher met Caleb's defiant gaze without flinching. The oppressive aura of a not yet fully matured alpha was enough to make most people's skin crawl, but Caleb seemed completely unaffected. Leo felt a surge of horrified admiration. Caleb was truly fearless. Under the weight of everyone's stares, Asher's lips curved into a wry, mocking smile. He said it was quite a coincidence, as he himself had a severe cold, and removing a layer of clothing might just worsen his condition. The gymnasium was indeed chilly after the recent rain. Leo felt a sense of déjà vu as Asher's gaze swept over Caleb's thin sweatshirt. He suggested, his voice deceptively casual, that perhaps Caleb could take off his sweatshirt, and he would trade his uniform jacket for it. The sarcastic retort, polite yet utterly scathing, hung in the air. The atmosphere crackled. Caleb's eyes didn't waver, and the smirk on his face sent a shiver down Leo's spine. Caleb's lips moved, his eyes glinting as if he was about to escalate things further. Leo braced himself for the inevitable explosion. What's the meeting about here? Their homeroom teacher's voice cut through the tension. Ms. Albright, who taught English, strode over. Her eyes immediately landed on Caleb, the only one improperly dressed. She asked where his uniform was. At the sight of the teacher, Caleb's defiant posture deflated. He lowered his eyes and mumbled that he had forgotten it. Ms. Albright instructed the monitors to write his name down, then turned back to him, her tone firm but not unkind. She reminded him this couldn't happen again and asked him to reflect on how often he actually wore his uniform properly. As Asher walked away, all the fight seemed to drain out of Caleb, leaving him looking dejected. He just gave a quiet MHM in response to his teacher. Ms. Albright had been college classmates with Caleb's mother and occasionally reported on his school behavior at her friend's request. In her presence, Caleb was generally more subdued. Seeing his forlorn expression, she lowered her voice, asking him why he was starting conflicts with him. She advised him to cause less trouble, reminding him he was a sophomore now. After securing his promise, she bustled back to the front of the class line. Northwood Preparatory Academy was the city's top private high school. Their class, in particular, had been given the best resources, primarily because Asher was a student in it. The class was a mix of Northwood's brightest minds and a handful of wealthy legacy students biding their time. Ms. Albright's ability to manage such a diverse and challenging group was a testament to her skill as an educator. Under her watch, even Caleb had become more manageable than in the past. After the assembly, Neither Caleb nor Leo felt like returning to class. When some boys from another class called out to them, Caleb gathered a few more of their own classmates and headed to the basketball court. They played for nearly 2 periods until they were all exhausted, collapsing onto the benches to rest. Caleb tilted his head back, gulping down water, his throat moving with the motion. A boy from the other class asked him about Dylan, a student from the athletics program, who had been complaining that Caleb was moving in on his girl, Jenna, whom he'd liked first. Before Caleb could answer, Leo scoffed, remarking on what a loser Dylan was. He questioned the idea of calling dibs on a girl as if it were a queuing system. Everyone laughed, including Caleb. The first boy added that he was just giving Caleb a heads up, as Dylan had been saying he was looking for a chance to cause trouble for him. Another friend chimed in, asking rhetorically if their Caleb would be scared of some loser like Dylan. Then, someone else changed the subject, asking if it was true that Caleb had clashed with Asher that morning. Caleb thought for a moment, then said it wasn't really a clash. Asher had just told him to go get his uniform, and he hadn't felt like it. Another boy from their class who had been nearby chimed in, saying that Asher had looked genuinely intimidating, and his smile had sent a cold sweat down his back. He told Caleb he had guts. A boy from the 3rd class, still shaken by what he'd witnessed, asked Caleb if he wasn't afraid of the consequences of provoking him. Leo stepped in to smooth things over, downplaying it as just an exchange of words and insisting that people like Asher weren't unreasonable like them. During the long mid-morning break, the group of truants finally trickled back into the classroom. Leo was munching on a beef jerky stick, while Caleb followed empty-handed. Their seats were in the second-to-last row, requiring them to pass Asher's desk. Caleb glanced over casually. Asher appeared to be working on a math problem, his head bowed and chin propped on his hand as he slowly wrote out equations in a notebook. Suddenly, Caleb stopped. He licked his lips and stood beside Asher's desk, his tone deliberately provocative. "Class president," he drawled, "I never realized you had such a sharp tongue." Asher's pen paused. Normally, not even Chris's loud mobile gaming next to him could break his concentration. But for some reason, Caleb's voice had sliced right through it. Caleb stood there waiting for a response, radiating the lazy arrogance of a classic troublemaker. Asher slowly lifted his head, his dark eyes sweeping over Caleb from head to toe, his expression unreadable. "Have you tasted it?" he asked, his voice flat. Chris, sitting beside him, was the first to break, letting out a sharp bark of laughter. Caleb froze. He hadn't expected Asher to play along with his taunt, let alone steer it into such a crude direction. Unsure how to respond and unwilling to just stand there looking foolish, he turned and stalked back to his seat. Leo watched him return, defeated, and shook his head internally. Caleb slumped into his chair, seemingly lost in thought. He remained motionless even after the bell rang for the next class. Leo nudged him, asking if he was stunned into silence by his own anger. Caleb frowned slightly. He asked Leo if he had ever noticed the scent on Asher. As an Omega, Leo should have been more sensitive to such things. In a school environment, both alphas and omegas were required to use scent blockers. Leo assumed Caleb was about to launch into another tirade, especially since no omega, including himself, had ever detected Asher's specific pheromones. He had an ironclad self-control that was legendary among the school's omega population. But as Leo waited for the insult, Caleb just made a soft sound of consideration. "It's actually kind of nice," he murmured. When another friend, Jason, returned to the classroom later, he saw a girl sitting in the seat in front of Chris and Asher. It was the evening study period, and the room was mostly empty. The girl was folding a test paper on her desk, smiling at Asher. She commented on how difficult the recent math test had been and how she hadn't understood the teacher's explanation, but Asher's breakdown had made it all clear. She thanked him sincerely. Asher gave a simple nod, saying it was no problem. The sheer number of his admirers meant she rarely had a chance to speak with him. Being this close, seeing his clean-cut, handsome features, made her feel bold. On an impulse, she asked if she could come to him again with questions in the future. Asher just smiled. It was Chris who intercepted, playfully asking why she didn't ask him instead, claiming he knew the material too. The girl glanced at Asher, who had his eyes lowered, showing no intention of joining the conversation. Taking this as a polite refusal, she bit her lip in disappointment and turned back to Chris, agreeing to ask him next time. After the girl left, Jason dropped into her vacant seat, complaining that his long legs felt cramped. He remarked on how even their class's top academic girl had a crush on Asher. Chris, scrolling through his phone, commented that Asher had already turned down the most popular girl in school, so this one probably didn't stand a chance either. Jason asked if he meant Jenna, then sighed dramatically, saying he thought their friend's little fox was the school beauty. Chris reminded him he was fighting with his girlfriend, Chloe. Jason confirmed it, complaining that he was always the one begging for forgiveness, but this time he was determined not to give in. Chris just shook his head, calling him whipped. Jason defended himself, claiming it was the mark of a superior man, and turned to Asher for backup. Chris scoffed at the idea of asking Asher, who would never let anyone control him. "I'd like to," Asher said, a faint smile on his lips. "Just haven't had the chance." Jason lamented that it was Asher's own fault for rejecting everyone. He felt sorry for all the girls who liked him and asked when he would ever see Asher actively pursue someone. Chris suddenly spoke up, a mischievous glint in his eye. He said there was one person he'd been proactive with, recalling something from earlier that day. He teased that Asher had been shockingly forward, asking someone if they had tasted how sharp his tongue was. Seeing Jason's eager expression, Chris sighed dramatically to build suspense, saying it was too scandalous for him to repeat. He asked if it was an Omega, if she was pretty, if she was in their class. Chris nodded solemnly, then added that yes, she was in their class but wasn't an Omega. His serious demeanor made Jason believe him. He leaned in, asking who it was. Nearby, Asher listened to Chris spin his tail, a slight curl to his lips, making no move to stop him. Seeing he had Jason hooked, Chris burst out laughing. "Caleb," he howled. "He came looking for trouble again today. He's hilarious." Before he could finish, the playful look on Jason's face hardened. "Him," he said, his voice flat. Chris noticed the strange shift in his tone and asked what was wrong. Jason stated that he still remembered the incident with someone named Nathan. He muttered that for all of Caleb's posturing, you'd think he was someone important. Before the end of English class, Ms. Albright assigned homework. They were to memorize a notoriously difficult poem and recite it to their group leader by the end of the week. In their section of the class, the group leader was Asher. Caleb watched with disinterest as, the moment the bell rang, a few girls immediately went up to recite the poem. Naturally, Caleb had no intention of memorizing it. He unlocked his phone, planning to play a game to distract himself from a sense of unease that had been bothering him for days. The previous day, at a gaming cafe near the school, an acquaintance, an alpha, had casually slung an arm around his shoulders. For some reason, every cell in Caleb's body had violently rejected the contact. It had taken all his willpower not to physically throw the guy off. He was about to launch the game when a message from Leo popped up. Caleb found it odd, since Leo was sitting right next to him. He opened it to find a photo of Asher. In the picture, Asher looked like he had just finished working out. His hair was slightly damp, and beads of sweat traced the lean muscles of his forearm. He was drinking from a water bottle, his distinct monolids half closed, giving him a slightly boyish look. The photo was candid and radiated an intense, masculine energy. A moment later, Leo retracted the photo, turning to Caleb with an embarrassed explanation that he'd sent it to the wrong person. He had meant to send it to their group chat, the Pillars of Northwood Prep. The group's grand name was misleading. Its members were exclusively the Omegas of Northwood. Caleb had once glimpsed Leo's phone and seen them debating which alpha at their school was best endowed. There were no limits. Caleb gestured toward his English textbook. He told Leo that instead of taking secret pictures, he should be memorizing the poem, remarking dryly that Leo was more dramatic than the text itself. Leo just giggled, then nudged Caleb, pointing at his phone screen. He mentioned a freshman who had just commented in the group chat, saying Caleb was so handsome that if he were an alpha, he'd definitely pursue him. A string of agreements followed. Caleb opened his game, casually telling Leo to let the freshman know that he was welcome to try any time. Leo dismissed it as a joke. As wild as Caleb was, Leo knew he had only ever been interested in girls. The Omega in the chat, however, seemed genuinely smitten and continued to praise Caleb. Leo just shook his head to himself. Caleb slept through most of his afternoon classes. An unusual exhaustion weighed him down, leaving him feeling drained and listless. With only one period left before they were released for dinner, he dragged himself toward the restroom. He was still groggy from sleep, but others were alert, their eyes drawn to him as the hallway breeze stirred the air. A distinct scent clung to him, prompting whispers. People wondered where Caleb had picked up such a strong pheromonal scent, speculating he'd been with an Omega and questioning the lack of scent blockers. Caleb vaguely heard the word pheromones, but his discomfort was too great to process it. He assumed he just really needed to use the restroom and quickened his pace. But even after relieving himself, the dizzying, feverish sensation didn't subside. It intensified. He pressed his fingers to his temples. It was at that moment that someone walked past him. The scent that came off the person was crisp and clean. Caleb was just the right height for his head to be level with the person's ear, and his gaze drifted upward. Realizing it was Asher, Caleb's instinctive urge to lean into the comforting presence mostly vanished. Yet, for some reason, Asher's proximity seemed to amplify the feverish feeling inside him. The chaotic energy rampaging through his body found a focal point and surged outward. A muffled groan escaped Caleb's lips as his legs gave way, and he had to grab the handle of a stall door to keep from collapsing. Asher stopped. He scanned Caleb from head to toe, his voice uncertain as he asked, "You're a beta?" Hearing the doubt in Asher's tone, Caleb managed a weak smirk. "What do you think?" he retorted. His confident reply momentarily made Asher question his own senses. But then he saw the flush in Caleb's eyes and the slight tremor in the fingers gripping the door handle. It was then that Asher knew his suspicion was correct. He had never imagined seeing Caleb in such a vulnerable state. Trying to be tactful, he gently informed him that he had the scent of an Omega on him. Caleb considered this for a moment. "Are you jealous?" he asked. Asher had never encountered someone with such a bizarre thought process. To prevent Caleb's mind from wandering further, he stated it plainly. He told him he might need to get retested. The pheromones were coming from him. He asked if Caleb really couldn't smell it himself. The meaning of his words finally sank in, leaving Caleb stunned. Before he could fully process the shock of possibly being an Omega, He saw Asher's gaze sweep over his face. Asher spoke slowly, telling him to wait in a stall for a moment. Fuck. The word escaped Caleb, his mind now racing with alarm. He looked at Asher warily. What are you thinking? Whatever it is, kill the thought. In a fight between us, it's not clear who'd come out on top. Your pheromones are practically pouring out of you, Asher said, his voice level. I'm going back to the classroom to get you an inhibitor. Caleb still looked unconvinced, his defensive posture making Asher feel an unexpected urge to tease him. Asher's gaze drifted pointedly to the nape of Caleb's neck. The look made Caleb's skin prickle, as if he were a piece of meat on a cutting block. He then heard Asher's suggestive tone, if you'd rather I help you solve this another way. Caleb's eyes widened. See that door, class president? I suggest you walk through it and don't look back. Asher's lips twitched. Then I guess you'll just have to keep thinking about it. He let the smile fade from his face, his tone returning to its usual lazy drawl. Even if I had any ideas, they wouldn't be about you. Caleb had never been so insulted in his life. He shot back that, even if he were into guys, he wouldn't let Asher bite him. Hearing the blatant provocation, Asher almost laughed. He was about to turn and leave when a hand grabbed the hem of his jacket from behind, the pull light but firm. I don't have one. Caleb began, the words feeling humiliating. But then he met Asher's calm, detached gaze, and a surge of defiance washed away his embarrassment. He felt that showing any shame would be a complete loss of face. He tried to sound as casual as possible. I'm not in heat. Just get a scent blocker. Ultimately, as an alpha, Asher couldn't truly know an omega's condition. And while Caleb had never experienced a heat cycle, he remembered enough from health class to know his current state wasn't that severe yet. He just felt unsteady on his feet and dizzy. Asher agreed. Back in the classroom, he remembered he didn't carry such things. Chris and Jason were alphas too. Asking anyone else would invite questions. He thought for a moment, then walked over to Leo's desk and spoke in a low voice, asking if he had a scent blocker. Leo, startled, nodded. Asher then asked if he also had an inhibitor. Leo nodded again, pulling 2 small boxes from his drawer and handing them to Asher. After Asher thanked him and left, Leo snapped out of his trance. He'd been so mesmerized by the handsome face that he had forgotten to ask Asher why he needed those things. He grabbed his phone and opened the Pillars of Northwood Prep group chat. Girlfriends, he typed frantically. The president just asked me for omega scent blockers and an inhibitor. The chat exploded. OMG, has my god descended to the mortal realm? When Asher returned to the restroom, he saw a boy standing by the entrance, peering inside. The boy was from the athletics program. Asher recognized him but couldn't recall his name. Seeing Asher, Dylan was also taken aback. He had just found out that the coffee Jenna had brought to their class earlier had been for Asher. The person Jenna liked was him. The unexpected appearance of his rival put Dylan in a strange mood. Unlike Caleb, whom he could openly threaten, he didn't dare provoke Asher. Asher remained silent, so Dylan spoke first. He asked if there was an omega inside, and if he was in heat. Asher didn't answer. The boy was blocking the entrance, and if Asher went in, it seemed likely he would follow. He wasn't sure if Caleb wanted others to know he might be an omega. The image of Caleb's flushed face and reddened eyes flashed in his mind, and Asher's brow furrowed. Dylan took his silence as confirmation. He knew Asher didn't seem to have a boyfriend or girlfriend, and assumed he was just messing around with the person inside. His expression shifted. He remarked on how fragrant the air was, and that he hadn't realized Asher was into that sort of thing. The pheromones were intoxicating, unlike any he'd smelled before. light and misty, a subtle fragrance that nonetheless stirred an alpha's desire to conquer. Drunk on the scent, Dylan's words became reckless. He speculated that the Omega was doing it on purpose, not using inhibitors in a school full of alphas. Practically waiting before he could finish, Asher grabbed him by the collar and dragged him away from the door. Dylan let out a few indignant protests, his head clearing instantly. Though Asher was slightly taller, Dylan was an athlete, stockier and heavier than the average alpha. He was shocked that Asher could pull him away from the door and over to the sinks with just one hand, his feet barely touching the ground. Asher checked the angle. The restroom entrance was no longer visible. He released his grip. If you like the smell so much, stand here and enjoy it. But if you take one step forward. He glanced at Dylan. Just try it. Dylan's blood ran cold. Though Asher was still in his school uniform, looking less like a delinquent than he did, Dylan found himself unable to move. He had once boasted to others that Asher, despite his powerful family, was just a goody-two-shoes who didn't cause trouble. But seeing him now, with his face cold and imposing, he seemed less like a student and more like something terrifying. Seeing Dylan's silence, Asher walked into the men's room right in front of him and locked the door. A while later, Dylan finally came to his senses, realizing he'd been standing frozen in a corner for several minutes after Asher had already gone. A flicker of anger ignited within him. He strode toward the restroom, and as if to prove a point, he pushed the door. It was locked from the inside. In disbelief, he pushed again, his hand trembling slightly. Was Asher insane? To do something like this at school? As soon as Asher returned, Caleb's head started to spin again. The disorienting, cloud-like feeling had dissipated after Asher left, but his return felt like flipping a switch inside Caleb, one that made him desperately want to be closer. He remembered Leo once lamenting that just seeing their class president made him feel an instinctual need for proximity. At the time, Caleb had mocked him for his lack of self-control. He had been wrong. Caleb hated this loss of control. He took the scent blocker from Asher's hand and, after a moment's hesitation, mumbled a quick, quiet thank you. The device looked like a small spray can. He'd seen Leo use one before. He aimed the nozzle at himself and sprayed liberally. Since he couldn't smell his own pheromones, he had to ask Asher if the scent was gone. The Omega pheromones were gradually suppressed by the blocker. Leo's blocker had a milky scent. Asher looked at him and said he thought it was gone. Unconvinced that Asher could tell from so far away, Caleb sprayed almost half the bottle. The blocker seemed to have a calming agent in it. His dizziness subsided, and he felt refreshed. He gestured for Asher to come closer, saying he couldn't smell anything from that distance. He pulled down the collar of his shirt, pointing to his glands. Come over here and smell properly. Asher shot him a look, his expression complicated. Caleb, newly differentiated as an Omega, was oblivious to the implications of his actions. But Asher was not. For an Omega to ask an Alpha to smell their glands was a blatant invitation. The scent is gone, Asher repeated firmly. Seeing his certainty, Caleb didn't press the issue. He straightened his clothes and pushed the door open. The area outside the restroom was empty. He checked his phone. Class was about to end. He needed to know what was happening to him. He shoved the blocker back into Asher's hand. I'm going to the hospital. Can you give this back to Leo for me? He muttered to himself that it was obviously Leo's, with its childish milky scent. As he said the words milky scent, a small laugh escaped him. It occurred to Asher that while Caleb mocked others, he wasn't very mature himself. Asher thought for a moment before offering a piece of advice. Caleb, don't just ask anyone to smell you. Caleb didn't pay his words any mind. The security guards at Northwood knew him well and let him leave campus even though it wasn't an official dismissal time. He hailed a cab and went to Central Hospital, heading straight for the emergency room, too impatient to wait for a regular appointment. It was a weekday, and the hospital wasn't crowded. His number was called quickly. A female doctor attended to him. After Caleb briefly explained his situation, she asked a few questions about his age and health. Then she asked how he had discovered he might be an Omega. He replied that a classmate of his had smelled it. The doctor's hand paused on the mouse. An alpha? She asked. Caleb nodded. Well, your classmate is a good person, she said as she printed out the forms for his tests. Caleb was puzzled by her comment. Recalling Asher's earlier, he sensed he was missing something. After leaving the ER, he pulled out his phone and messaged Chris, who was an alpha. If an Omega asks you to smell them, he typed, "What does that mean?" Chris, who must have been on his phone, replied instantly, "It means my lucky day has arrived." Caleb felt a growing sense of unease and sent back a string of question marks. When Chris's next message came through, his mind exploded. What else could it mean when an O asks an A to smell them? The seduction, dude. Caleb stood frozen in front of the automated payment machine. A hot flush crept up his neck and into his ears. He let out a low curse. That evening, he received his test results. The data showed that the Omega hormones in his body had surpassed the average levels and were still rising. He was, indeed, a newly differentiated Omega. The doctor, surprised to see someone differentiate at his age and noting the complex expression on the boy's handsome face, carefully explained the necessary precautions and prescribed him inhibitors and blockers. She also reminded him to get his personal information updated, changing the gender marker from Beta to Omega. When Caleb got home, he ran into his mother, Fiona, who was about to leave. She was on the phone in the living room, her usually calm face etched with anxiety. She ended the call and saw him. "Caleb," she said, surprised. "Why are you home so early? Are you heading out?" "Leo is back in the hospital," she explained. "Your Uncle Henry is already there with him." She sighed. "The doctors say if he can make it past 10, his health should start to improve. You should visit him when you have time. He adores you." Caleb just made a non-committal sound. It was only then that Fiona realized it should have been Caleb's evening study session. She asked why he was home. He told her he had gone for a checkup and handed her the report. When she saw the results, she looked up at him in disbelief. "Caleb, you..." She paused. "Are you feeling okay? Is this hard for you to accept?" The string of concerned questions, coupled with the genuine worry on her face, made the corner of Caleb's mouth lift slightly. "I'm fine," he said, reassuring her. "There's not much difference between an Omega and a Beta." But Fiona's brow remained furrowed. She had always thought her son was too beautiful, and his sharp temper made him vulnerable. As a Beta, he could hold his own. But to differentiate so late, and as an Omega of all things, was unlucky. "If you're okay with it, then that's good," she said. "We'll need to update your records. I should have some free time next week." Her phone rang again. The person on the other end was insistent, and she looked torn. Caleb saw her dilemma. "It's fine," he said. "I can go change it myself in a few days or ask Leo to go with me. You should get to the hospital." Fiona nodded, turning her back to him to put on her shoes at the door. Caleb asked casually, "Now that Uncle Henry and Leo are in Northwood, are you going to move in with them?" Fiona replied distractedly, "Your uncle bought a house over on the new development side. It's close to your school. Maybe we can all move in together next month?" She opened the door. "Caleb, get some sleep. I probably won't be back tonight." Set an alarm so you're not late tomorrow. After she left, Caleb stared at the closed door and whispered to the empty, cavernous room, "But I don't want to live with them. I just want to live with you." His voice was soft, and in the silence, it sounded utterly lonely. Perhaps because of his recent differentiation, Caleb slept poorly that night. He completely forgot about the alarm and slept through his first 2 classes. By the time he arrived at school, the mid-morning break was almost over. As he sat down, Leo leaned over. "Dude," he said, his voice grave. "Big trouble." He put down his phone. "Dylan's lost his mind. He's telling everyone he saw Asher messing around with an Omega at school yesterday. He's saying the Omega might be underage, and that Asher forced him. If it was forced, that's a crime. In their society, where Omegas were a protected and rare gender, any harm done to them was prosecuted severely." Caleb's drowsiness vanished. He looked toward the front of the class. Asher's seat was empty. He asked Leo if Asher had said anything to him. When Leo looked back at him, confused, Caleb realized that Asher hadn't told anyone that he was the one who had used the scent blocker. He'd been so focused on getting to the hospital that he hadn't mentioned whether his new status could be shared. So Asher had kept it to himself. He had protected him? "Where is he?" Caleb asked. Leo shrugged, saying he thought he'd gone out. Caleb stood up and walked toward the athletics program classroom at the other end of the hall. Dylan's desk was near the back door. As Caleb approached, he could hear Dylan and his friends laughing loudly. "Asher really messed up this time," Dylan was saying. "Even with his family's influence, they can't just make this disappear." A boy next to him suggested to a girl, "Don't you Omegas have that forum? You should post this." The girl hesitated. Dylan had posted about it on his social media the night before but had deleted it by morning, probably afraid of leaving evidence. She didn't want to be the one to stick her neck out. She answered vaguely that they should wait, since the school was supposedly checking the security cameras. "Wait for what?" Another boy scoffed. "The whole grade knows he cornered someone in the bathroom. The teachers even confirmed there were traces of Omega pheromones." Dylan made a thoughtful sound. "But you can't blame Asher entirely. I mean, how desperate does that Omega have to be? No inhibitor, no blocker. He was just asking to get screwed." The girl frowned, clearly unhappy. "Sometimes Omegas can't control their pheromones," she said defensively. Seeing her displeasure, Dylan quickly tried to backtrack. "That's not what I meant. There are different kinds of Omegas. You're not like that kind." He made a crude gesture with his hand. "That's called begging for it." The words had barely left his mouth when the half-open back door was kicked wide open. Dylan, whose desk was right next to it, was slammed by the door, stumbling and nearly falling. He turned, ready to curse out whoever had opened the door so violently, and came face to face with Caleb. Caleb grabbed the collar of his t-shirt and yanked him forward, pulling him out of the classroom through the back door. The fact that Asher could manhandle him was one thing, but to be dragged around by Caleb, a supposed beta, in front of so many people, was a profound humiliation. Dylan struggled, and Caleb finally let him go. The moment he was free, Dylan exploded. "What the hell is wrong with you, Caleb?" Caleb grabbed a nearby chair and swung it, bringing it down hard on Dylan's head. Dylan stared, stunned, until a warm liquid trickled down his face and the sharp pain hit him. He was bleeding. Everyone was frozen in shock. Asher was just leaving the main office when he saw the scene unfold. Caleb tossed the chair aside and faced the dazed Dylan, his expression a chilling mix of amusement and fury. "I'm the Omega you were just talking about," he said, his voice dangerously low. He met Dylan's incredulous stare. "The one begging for it." A dead silence fell over the hallway, soon broken by a flurry of whispers. Dylan opened his mouth, but no words came out. If Caleb was an omega, his humiliation was complete. An alpha dragged around and then brained with a chair by an omega. He cursed under his breath, muttering that Caleb didn't seem like an omega at all. Before he could finish, Caleb grabbed him again, preparing to slam him against the wall. Dylan's eyes widened in fear. Just as he was about to hit the wall, he was pulled back. Caleb had one hand on his neck and the other tangled in his hair. "Don't seem like one?" Caleb purred in his ear. "Didn't you just say I was desperate?" Dylan, with a review that glowing, "You must have a crush on me, right?" His voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet hallway, everyone heard it. A few people couldn't help but snicker. Dylan's face flushed with rage. He had hesitated to fight back when he heard Caleb was an omega, but now he saw Caleb was just insane. He struggled, shouting for Caleb to get off him. The moment the curse left his lips, Caleb smashed his head against the wall. The sound was sickening. Dylan, already injured, nearly passed out from the pain. He was about to do it again when a hand clamped down on his wrist from behind. The scent of clean, crisp winter snow filled the air. Caleb stumbled back, colliding with a solid chest. "The teachers are coming," Asher said. "Stop." Caleb tried to wrench his arm free, but Asher's grip was like iron. He was forced to release Dylan. The dean of students shouted from down the hall, pushing through the crowd of students. Dylan, now free, was gasping for air. As the dean's approach distracted Caleb, Dylan's eyes darted to the discarded chair. He was about to make a move for it when someone kicked it away with a sharp clatter. "Haven't you had enough?" Asher's voice was low, his eyes cold as he looked down at Dylan. "Stop making trouble for yourself." His tall frame was incredibly intimidating in that moment, and Dylan instinctively froze. The dean, seeing the state of things, was furious. He took them to the office. The final decision was for both Caleb and Dylan. They each had to write a 3,000-word apology letter and apologize to one another. Dylan mumbled his apologies first. Then it was Caleb's turn. He looked at Dylan for a long moment, then said slowly, "I'm sorry. I don't know my own strength. I must have hurt you." His apology was dripping with insincerity, but given the circumstances, Ms. Albright let it slide. She didn't expect Asher to chime in. "I'm at fault too," he said to Dylan. "I should have stopped him sooner. Maybe you wouldn't have been hurt so badly." Caleb had to suppress a laugh. He played along immediately. "Yeah, why didn't you stop me sooner?" Asher raised an eyebrow, a slight curve to his lips. He had a natural air of superiority that made even his apologies sound insincere. "Mainly because it was my first time seeing an alpha get beaten so thoroughly by an omega without fighting back," he said, his voice laced with mock wonder. "I was a bit stunned." He even patted Dylan's shoulder lightly. "Sorry about that. You'll have to bear with it." On the way back to class, Caleb walked beside Asher. For the first time, he found him somewhat tolerable. He asked how Asher got the girl, Sun Meng, to speak up for him, and where the screenshot of Dylan's post had come from. Asher explained that Sun Meng was a good person and had come to him after seeing Caleb taken to the office. As for the screenshot, someone had sent it to him the night before. A deeper smile touched his lips. He said he hadn't expected Dylan to walk right into it, implying that even if Dylan hadn't caused a scene that day, he had intended to deal with him anyway. Caleb felt a brief shiver of fear, realizing Asher could be formidable. But the thought of Dylan's sputtering rage quickly replaced it with amusement. "I have to say, class president," Caleb said, a teasing note in his voice, "you've got some moves." Before Asher could reply, he added, "Now we're even." He explained that he was referring to Asher not telling Leo or anyone else about him being the one who needed the blocker. He said he didn't care about being an Omega or Beta, but he wasn't an idiot. He knew Asher had been helping him. When Asher looked at him with surprise, Caleb grumbled that he wasn't that ungrateful. He finished by saying that since he'd beaten Dylan up, everyone now knew Dylan was the one lying. It was a calculated move to escalate the situation, ensuring no lingering rumors could survive. "You don't have to thank me," Caleb continued, his swagger returning. "I'm just a helpful classmate. But if you really want to show your gratitude, the next time Jenna brings you coffee or anything, just politely decline and suggest she give it to me instead." "You're pursuing Jenna?" Asher asked as they neared their classroom. When Caleb nodded, he added, "And she hasn't said yes." He paused. "She has good taste." It took Caleb a second to understand the insult. He bristled, stepping closer. "Are you asking for a—" Before he could finish, Asher abruptly pulled open the classroom door. The math teacher, mid-lecture, scowled at them. "What's all the shouting? Caleb, get up here and solve this problem on the board." Asher, Caleb decided, was a devious bastard. The problem was far beyond Caleb's abilities. After 3 minutes of standing uselessly at the board, the teacher sighed and told him to sit down. The moment he did, Leo pounced, demanding to know what had happened and why he and Asher were suddenly a team. 2 different group chats had exploded with the news. Caleb had beaten up Dylan, and Caleb was the mysterious Omega from the bathroom incident with Asher. Leo was reeling. His best friend had undergone a gender transformation overnight. Caleb leaned back. "Want to know how I became an Omega? Want to know what Asher and I did in the bathroom? Want to know what happened to Dylan?" Leo nodded frantically. "Write a 3,000-word apology letter for me," Caleb said. Leo told him to get lost. During gym class a few days later, after a warm-up lap, the teacher announced free time. Chris wanted to play soccer, and Asher was indifferent. As they went to the equipment room, they overheard 2 students talking. They were discussing how Dylan, his head barely healed, had already challenged Caleb's class to a basketball game to reclaim his pride. Asher's hand paused over a soccer ball before he picked up a basketball instead. Outside, he saw Caleb and Dylan facing off on the court. A crowd was already gathering. Chris waved Asher over, explaining the bet. The losing team had to perform a synchronized dance on the assembly stage. The game was intense. The athletics team was physically imposing, but Caleb's friends were skilled in their own right. Caleb himself was a blur of motion, his shots sinking into the net with startling precision. The score remained tight until the final minutes of the first quarter, when Caleb landed a 3-pointer, securing the lead for their class. "Damn!" Chris exclaimed. "That was a sick shot." The second quarter began, but the other team started playing dirty. One of their biggest players, a guy named Kevin, intentionally fouled one of Caleb's teammates, injuring him. An argument broke out. The injured player couldn't continue. Caleb, his eyes cold, told Kevin to get off the court and send in a substitute. They were now a man down. Leo offered to play, but he wasn't strong enough. As Caleb hesitated, someone picked up the basketball beside him. "I'll take his spot." It was Asher. A wave of murmurs went through the crowd. The school's golden boy and its top troublemaker were going to play together. Caleb looked at him. "You know you'll have to dance if we lose, right?" "It's pretty embarrassing." "I know," Asher replied, tossing the ball to him. "I don't plan on dancing." His calm arrogance made Caleb grin. The game resumed. At first, their lack of coordination was a liability. But as the game wore on, they began to find a rhythm. A strange, unspoken synergy developed between them. In the final seconds of the second quarter, with their team down by 1 point, Caleb found himself trapped. He saw Asher cutting toward the basket. Without a second thought, he passed the ball. Asher caught it, dodged a defender, and leaped for a shot. His momentum carried him out of bounds, but not before he released the ball from behind the backboard at an impossible angle. The gym held its breath. The ball hit the rim, rolled, and dropped through the net. A buzzer beater. The crowd erupted. They dominated the third quarter, their teamwork seamless now. Dylan, frustrated, started playing even more recklessly, trying to trip Caleb up, but Caleb was too quick for him. Their class won by a landslide. True to the bet, the athletics team was forced to perform a humiliatingly cheerful aerobics routine along with a freshman girls' gym class. The last one left dancing, singled out by Caleb's friends, was Dylan. Later, Asher found Dylan in the empty restroom. He showed him a video he'd taken on his phone of Dylan's solo dance performance. "Let's make a deal," Asher said calmly. "I delete the video, and you stop bothering Caleb." Dylan, cornered, reluctantly agreed. As Asher was about to leave, he paused, placing a hand on Dylan's shoulder. "Don't forget," he said. An overwhelming wave of pure alpha pheromones washed over Dylan. A silent, terrifying that left him trembling long after Asher was gone. On Saturday, Caleb was at the hospital. His mother had asked him to look after Leo, his young stepbrother. The boy was whining for a soda. Caleb, despite his better judgment, relented, telling the boy he could have one sip of a room temperature one. As he crouched down to negotiate, a soft laugh made him look up. Asher was standing on the other side of the hospital garden. He was dressed casually in a white hoodie and dark pants, the relaxed clothes making him look both mature and boyish. He said he was there visiting his grandmother. Caleb remembered his mother complaining about a VIP patient taking over an entire floor. That must have been her. He asked Asher to watch Leo for a moment while he went to a vending machine. When he returned, he found them talking quietly. After giving Leo his single promised sip, it was time for them to go back upstairs. The boy's face fell, asking if Caleb would stay for lunch. Caleb, wanting to escape, quickly used Asher as an excuse, saying he had plans with his classmate. This only made the boy's eyes well up with tears. He was sensitive and could feel Caleb's reluctance to be part of his new family. Caleb, flustered and terrible at comforting children, looked at Asher in desperation. Asher whispered something in the boy's ear. Miraculously, the crying stopped. Just as Caleb was about to ask what he'd said, his stepfather, Henry, arrived. He saw the soda and gently chided Caleb, reminding him of Leo's fragile health. After they left, Caleb turned to Asher, the casual swagger returning to his posture. "What did you say to him?" Asher's eyes lingered on his face. "I told him if he kept crying, his big brother was going to start crying too." He paused, a slow smile spreading across his face. "And you? Don't you think it's time you were a good boy too?" Caleb looked at him blankly. Asher reminded him of the bet they'd made earlier, when Caleb had rashly promised that if Asher could make Leo stop crying, he would call him Dad. Caleb's face turned red. Under Asher's expectant gaze, he finally mumbled the word, barely audible. "Dad, what was that?" Asher leaned closer. "I didn't hear you." "Dad." Caleb's temper flared. "Dad, are you happy now, Dad?" "I am," Asher said, a genuine laugh in his voice. "Say it one more time. I want to record it." Caleb was about to tell him to screw himself when a jolt, like an electric current, shot through his body. A wave of heat spread from his spine outward, making his limbs feel weak. His breathing quickened, and a pink flush crept up his neck. A sweet, intoxicating scent bloomed around him, wild and unrestrained. It was his pheromones, more potent than ever before. Asher froze. The scent hit him like a physical blow, awakening a primal, possessive instinct deep within him. His eyes were drawn to the smooth, pale skin of Caleb's neck. His mind screamed at him to claim it, to mark this omega as his. He forced himself to look away, his voice hoarse. "Are you?" He shouldn't have spoken. The sound of his voice, the alpha scent clinging to him, was too much for Caleb. He fought the overwhelming urge to throw himself at Asher. "I'm going to the bathroom," he gasped and turned to leave. "Wait," Asher said, his own control fraying. "I'll go with you." The journey to the restroom was torturous. The pheromones of other people in the hospital felt like needles against Caleb's skin. Only Asher's presence provided any relief, yet it was also the source of the unbearable attraction pulling him apart. Inside a stall, his fumbling hands found the inhibitor his mother had forced him to carry. In his haste, he dropped it. After retrieving it, he realized he couldn't get the cap off. His hands were too weak. He confessed his dilemma to Asher, who was waiting outside. Asher, his patience worn thin by the pheromones flooding the small space, instructed him through the door with amused exasperation. Caleb opened the door a crack and passed the injector out. The sight of his slender fingers, pink from the heat, made Asher's breath catch. He quickly twisted the cap off and handed it back. The inhibitor worked fast, dousing the fire in his veins. After splashing his face with cold water, he thanked Asher quietly. It was clear they couldn't stay there together. As they stepped out of the restroom, however, Caleb flinched. The air was thick with the scents of other alphas, each one causing a painful, allergic reaction on his skin. Red blotches began to appear on his neck and arms. "You need to see a doctor," Asher said, his voice tight with concern. He reached out to touch a red patch on Caleb's hand, but Caleb grabbed his wrist first. The moment their skin made contact, a wave of profound relief washed over Caleb. The redness on his hand began to fade before their eyes. He looked at Asher, a little dazed. "I'm going to the doctor," he said, his grip on Asher's wrist tightening slightly. He hesitated. "Will you come with me?" They ended up in the specialized ABO clinic. The journey there was a trial, with Caleb reacting aggressively to every passing alpha, forcing Asher to physically restrain him. Finally, the doctor diagnosed him with a rare condition, pheromone rejection syndrome. His body was treating all alpha pheromones as hostile allergens. All except for one. The doctor looked from Caleb's chart to Asher, who stood beside him. "It seems," she said, "that your system has identified this specific alpha's pheromones as a compatible soothing agent. Essentially, he's your walking antidote." Caleb and Asher stared at each other, the weight of the diagnosis settling between them in the sterile silence of the examination room.